coffee and reading the paper, and I was listening to the Symphony of the Woods. It was beautiful, all the birds singing, and it's one of the great signs of spring is the joy of the woods coming alive with the sound of music. Tonight our guest speaker is Amber Burnett. Amber has a master's degree from the University of Minnesota in environmental studies with an emphasis on environmental education. And she works as an interpreter at a number of nature centers. She is a licensed bird banding biologist with the North Central Bird Observatory. And she conducts field work specifically focusing on grasslands habitat, especially in support of urban green spaces for birds. For the past 5 years, she has been leading a field study on the breeding and migrating birds of Long Lake Regional Park. She has banded more than 1,800 birds of 70 species. And she has done this work as a volunteer for Ramsey County Park. Many of us, a number of us, if you walk through the park in the spring and the fall, Ben knows Amber, Catherine and I have met Amber and her team. We've all encountered them working, and there's a net, and they catch the birds, they band them, and they document them, and I'm really excited to learn about the birds of our neighborhood, the birds of the Symphony of the Woods.
Yeah, nicely done, Mark. Wow. Okay, so can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. This is a little weird for me because I usually like being out a little bit closer, so I am going to wander back and forth a little bit just because the gulf actually makes me a little nervous. So thank you for having me here tonight. I really do appreciate it. I think when Mark and I spoke, how we wanted to do this is I consider these conversations. I really don't consider them like a presentation or a talk because this is for you. And really and truly, this is for you because these are your neighbors. That is literally what we're going to do tonight is talk about your neighbors. So we're going to, show you some really cool stuff that you didn't know was happening. And then, did you want to do questions at the end, Mark? Is that what you were thinking? Okay, terrific. All right, so the one thing, though, that you guys may have to help me with is obviously we're going to have lots of pictures of birds, right? Because we're going to talk about them. Most of them, you'll know, they're my hand, and most people know I have a couple of rings on my fingers, so these are the ones that you'll kind of recognize they're my hands. I will maybe forget to tell you which birds they are as I'm going through the slides, so somebody yell at me and be like, hey, and remind me to tell you what birds they are, because sometimes I focus on the text on the slide instead of the birds. So you guys can do that, and that is absolutely allowed. Is that ringing loud, you guys? That's a little weird.
Keep going.
All right.
I'll work on it.
Okay, sounds good. Ours on it. Okay, so the first bird, and as I'm going to look at it like you are, so the bird on the far left is actually, that was a big surprise for me, and one of my, I just love them. They're called the LBBs, the little brown birds, the sparrows. So how many of you are birders in here, actually? And you can, I'm a bird nerd, I'll say it. All right, a couple hands. Okay. So the sparrows about bring me to tears. I love them. They are so amazing. And that is actually a bird that was a surprise to me. When we got going, and we'll talk a little bit about how this project got started in the first place. The first one I saw, I think I dropped to my knees and started to cry. I was so happy. They're a super cool bird. The one in the middle is called a Wilson's warbler. And that's one that we are going to talk about as well. It has a pretty significant conservation status, and that was a great bird to find. And how about that one on the far right? Does anybody know that one? Eastern bluebird, yeah. And that's been actually, so we're starting the 6th year this year. Last year, I hope you noticed there's some really spanky new bluebird boxes at Long Lake. Mike Goodnature and I spent a couple afternoons, and we'll talk about those. Okay. So, yeah, I always like starting a conversation with a thank you. right? Because that really is where things start. So thank you very much for coming tonight. I know you have lots of options of what you want to do and what you want to learn about. I think it's great to have an education committee because we're all lifetime learners, right? So thank you very much for doing that. And, you know, as an extension, thank you for caring about Long Lake. That is very kindly, I've heard one of my friends refer to it as, that's kind of unassuming. And that's, you know, like saying, you know, she's got a great personality, right? But what we found is that something that's got not really advanced features in a landscape really can hide some really amazing things. And I have one quote that some of you might recognize. It's actually one of my favorites, and this is kind of where it comes from when we want to learn about something. In the end, we will conserve only what we love love only what we understand, we will understand only what we are taught. So that is one of the opportunities that I really enjoy is, yes, I do get to go out in the cold and in the hot and in the bugs and in the sweat and all that good stuff. But then I get to come and talk to people about it. And that is really enjoyable for me. That bird that I have there is called a Philadelphia vireo. And that's another one that I was, they're not a breeder here, and I was pleasantly surprised to find there. Okay, so here's what I think we're going to cover and kind of how we're going to do it. The challenge for something like this is, as an ecologist, and I'll talk a little bit about my background in a moment, we always think about things in a system. So it's kind of a circle, it's not linear. We are going to have to talk linear, right? Because we have to start somewhere and show you some slides and get somewhere. So you guys may have to just hang with me as we do it. We're going to get at some things indirectly, but I promise you it's going to be worth the ride. So we'll try to set you up. Here's how I think we're going to do it. So the information that I'm collecting, and I'll give you again the background of the project in just a moment, is for Ramsey County. But broadly, we have the opportunity to really talk about conservation for birds. At 5 years, this is actually what you'd consider a long-term study already. So we had a way to come in on it and then add something as we went. We are going to look at some totals. Normally numbers aren't that interesting in a presentation. I mean, who wants to sit and look at numbers in an evening? But, you know, some of these are kind of impressive. So I think, and you will be quizzed. Nobody's going to have to, like, you know, you still get cookies if you don't remember any of the numbers. But I think they're interesting. I did pick out a couple of stories or birds that really were kind of special. I could, you know, we'd have a weekend sleepover if I really pulled out all of the really good ones. And then everybody does ask me, so I did put in a couple of pictures of how I band. So the bird in the hand and how I collect information. So I did do that at the very end. And looking forward, yeah, so at the end of every season, then I turn this information in, and actually I'm texting Mike Goodnature, who's the manager for the park, for the natural resources area of it. And I mean, I just texted him, I was out this morning, and I texted him pictures and keep him up to date. But we do get together at the end of the season, and so I do have like one slide, one of the things we're going to talk about. Okay, so this is actually the one I don't like the most, but you know, if you have a speaker, you want to know a little bit about them, right? So yes, I'm originally from South Dakota. I'm a farmer rancher's kid, so the idea of how people interact with the land is how I grew up. It's smaller scale here than how I grew up, but it's still a really important underpinning or kind of a foundation of why I want to do this. I did go to the University of Minnesota, and my master's is, it's thinking about birds and how it works with ecology, which is really the study of how all these things work together. And then it's really not useful for scientists just to do their work if they can't talk about it, because then you're just in your own little world and nobody's going to fund your work, and they're not going to be able to be a partner with you to do actually, like, you know, you will be out there, you will be seeing things, you will vote for things that come up in Ramsey County, for example. So it's really important, I think, to have that as a background, so that's what I chose when I went to school. So I actually work at the Science Museum of Minnesota. That's my daytime gig. But I believe very strongly in volunteering, and I have a permit from the federal government to ban birds. You do need to have that. And then I have a permit from Ramsey County to be there and do that work there. My interest, is grassland species. So if you'll recall, it was in the fall of 2017, was kind of the end of a lot of big work that was happening over there. There was a lot of buckthorn that was being taken out, the prairie, kind of that grasslands hill, that first parking lot when you first come in, and kind of that next area. There'd been a real concentration to try to bring some of those areas, first of all, get some of that invasive stuff out, and then try to bring in some of the native plants that should be there as part of that landscape type. So I came in at a pretty good time to be able to offer something. So I knew Mike Goodnature, we banded osprey together for many years. There's the Ramsey osprey and then the Arsenal osprey. And so I knew Mike already from that. And I met with him and said, hey, you know what, do you want another tool to kind of think about how you manage this land? And he said, that would be great. That's one more piece to kind of what we're doing. So I came in at year 0 on that big heavy work at Long Lake. And it literally was, all right, so Mike said, this is what I think I should do. As a land manager for these large, open, urban green spaces, this is what we think we should be doing. And I said, all right, well, let's see if we can give birds a voice and see if they can give us a little bit of information on this. If we think they should be there, are they really? And if they're not there, why not? So what we're doing is basically taking a methodology, how you do something, and it's data. It is a very accepted way you're collecting this information in basically number formats, and then you're going to turn it into a narrative. So now we're storytelling, right? So we're giving birds an opportunity to have a voice in this work. And Mike can take that information and use it. We've already talked to the county. He's a great grant writer, so we have some opportunities now to make things even better. So birds kind of have a say in this. And that's pretty good, because as you guys probably all know, boy, birds can use all the help they can get, right? Because it's kind of tough out there being a bird.
What's that bird?
Pardon? Oh, very good. Nice job. That is a Wilson's Warbler. That's one from the front with the little black. Yep. They're tiny. They're only like 7 grams, 7 paper clips. But super ferocious. They're super great. So again, kind of this is the background of why I came out there in the first place. So it really is to support Ramsey County. I mean, it is absolutely what it is that they can use when they are planning, whether it's part of the Rice Creek watershed, so it's a larger, Long Lake is one part of a larger, but it's thinking about when they make a decision on either planting something or burning something or taking something out, it's thinking about in 5 years and 10 years from now, what does that look like? And is now the time to do some of these things? Management does have to happen, It's true that when you have a big open area like this, you have a lot of invasives that are coming in, whether it's the deer that are coming in and pooping stuff or on your shoes when you walk in there. You do need to keep an eye on that kind of stuff because invasive species get a hold and then they choke out all the things that are native. So you need to keep an eye on that. And also, and most of you probably know this, this land has changed what it was. I mean, at one time it was farmstead and there were, orchards, and then it has changed and it is a city for a county park now. So over time, this land has actually been used differently, and there are pieces that have kind of remained with each one of these kind of an iteration. And the final piece, and this is the one that if any of you in your professional life were ever faced with, this is the task, how do you know if it succeeded, right? Everybody wants to know, how do you assess? How do you figure out if it was a success at all? And that's really tough, but it's really important, especially if you're writing a grant. So what, again, I kind of offered when I approached Mike was, we can actually put some data together that you really wouldn't have unless you were out there in the sweat and in the hot and in the bugs and in the cold. But it really does yield some really good information. So that's the background on the project. Oh, there we go. That is actually an orange-crowned warbler. And it really does have an orange crown. Can you guys see that? I had to do that to make you see it, because normally it's what they call veiled. But and so you can actually see it, and you gotta hold it just right too, so you can see that. A lot of birds have names, and it's difficult to really figure out why they got the name that they did. All right, so I apologize, most of the slides are not gonna have a lot of text, but This one does, and the reason for that is when you approach a project that has to be steeped in science, you really do need a reason. You need to come up with why it is that you're doing. So, in essence, I had to come up with a reason to tell the Bird Banding Lab, which is who gives me my permit. So it's the federal government, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Geological Survey, and then under them is the Bird Banding Lab. So they give me my permit, they give me the bands. I have to buy all the other stuff to put the bands on and all the other stuff you need. But they want to know what it is that I'm doing. And I appreciate that. This isn't something that everybody should do. It's difficult, and it is lives, I mean, in essence. So I had to come up with a reason why I was going to do this. So the primary goal is to look at if birds are using Long Lake in the fall and spring as a restaurant, gas station, hotel, right? Are you stopping in? And then, can I act as a real estate agent if you want to stay there in the summer and raise your family? So is this park set up to be able to support different species of birds for different reasons, different time of the year? And we're going to look at specifically the things that had already started. So this native grassland and prairie and oak woodland. So we're going to see if that work is what is a good driver, that that is to the table. And as I kind of mentioned, it's going to give birds a voice. So that's what the background of this project was. No picture. Okay. All right, so here comes the numbers. And that is a yellow warbler, and you guys believe me, right? Is that great? Okay. So yes, as in our introduction, yeah, 1,800 individuals that I banded. That's a lot. And that's not counting the birds that I banded and then I see them again. And that's pretty great. So that's a couple hundred additional in the last couple of years in particular. So 1,800 individuals, about 1,800 that I banded new, 70 species, that's right. That's a good slice of a lot of birds that you'll see here. In the state of Minnesota, so we're counting southern Minnesota, which looks a lot different than here, and northern Minnesota, which looks a lot different than here. You could reasonably, in a 12-month time, expect to see around 300 species in Minnesota. There are a lot of accidentals, like the red-throated loon. You'll see that once in your lifetime, maybe. So 70 that I can get in my equipment is pretty good. That's a pretty nice slice. I mean, you know, we're not going to probably end up with the great blue heron. We're not going to end up with, you know, some of those big ones. So 70 that I could get on my hands on, that's pretty good.
Would you tell me the name of that bird again?
This is a yellow warbler, Cetophasia petachia, which the petachia means rash, because there's red streaking on the males. Yeah. So, and again, thank you in the introduction, 11 volunteers, including me. We put in 1,300 hours. 1,300 hours on this project so far. Yeah, so I can pretty confidently say that what we've come up with, we've done the time to be able to see it. And then the equipment I use are mist nets. Yes, you're probably not going to see them. That's kind of the point. I don't want you or dogs or anybody running into them. And more importantly, the idea is that the birds will actually not see them either. So they're mist nets. So the birds will fly into them. I have my volunteers that I've trained, or they've been doing it longer than I have, so we safely take them out. But you count those hours too, and I've got a little closer to 1,400 hours on those, because you'll have more than one out at a time. So it's a pretty big project. Okay, so the other piece to this, so yes, it's being there and putting your hands on birds and recording all the information. But the other piece that I told Mike that I would do that is also beneficial to this is, does anybody use eBird or know about eBird? Okay, so this is absolutely free, ebird.org, and you actually don't even need an account. What this will do is you record on this date, at this location, I saw this. So here is an example. I went out Sunday, and you can see on the left, Sunday the 23rd of April, I saw 39 species of birds. So this is just what I saw and heard. And that is now in this little database. And Long Lake Regional Park has 184 species that have been seen at some point in the duration of this being up, probably about 10 years. and 675 checklists. So that means I will put in one every time I go, so I'll probably have 60 of them in a year or something like that. But other people are doing it too. Here's why this is cool. So any of you have any summer plans? You're gonna travel somewhere? Anybody wanna tell me where you're gonna go?
To the lake,
Okay, where's the lake? What lake?
Wisconsin,
Okay,
and north of Bryce Lake.
okay. So if you were a birder and you wanted to know what birds were being seen there, you could find that in here. So if there's a bird you absolutely would love to see, you can see if that bird is there. Or you're going there and you want to see just what's there. And you know what? Somebody, maybe your niece from Nebraska is coming to visit you here, and she can't wait to see X. She can do all that and look in there before she comes. If you are going to travel to Atlanta, Georgia, you can look and find birds there. A grad student in Italy can look in here and say, wow, I really want to see what grassland sparrows are around in, I don't know, Chicago, Illinois. So this information can be accessed by anybody. And it's you traveling, you're interested, you're a birder, or if somebody really wants to start looking at what we call temporal or spatial, so over time, over an amount of land, this is a way to collect that information and start to get that, which is really amazing and really great. We're really learning a lot by people like you and I just putting this information in. I have at the top PHVI, so that one bird that I call the Philadelphia vireo. Do you remember that one? Kind of a little gray head, not a real knockout bird. When I banded one of those birds in the fall a couple of years ago, it turned out it was the latest sighting of that species in Ramsey County by like 8 days. So it, on itself, that's interesting, and I could prove it because I had it in hand. I took the picture and loaded it up. But what is interesting about that is, what if somebody the next couple of years is also going to start seeing it late like I did? That's how you start to see when things change, right? You don't notice it right away, but you'll notice it maybe in a few years, or several different people see it. So this is another piece to what I'm doing, which is to collect this information in a different way and put it in here. And you guys can all do it too, which is kind of great. Okay, so I am going to warn you that I don't think that I'm a show person, but I did put a few things here for effect. And I'm going to do like dramatic pauses because I think it's important. Okay, so the first bird, so this bird's going to stay on the same slide. That is a cool looking bird, right? I'm actually going to remember to tell you this one before you go. It's called a brown creeper. They go up and down the tree, and they're looking for like little spider egg casings in the bark. But they have the coolest long bill and the coolest little tiny feet. And yeah, those are my fingers, so that's how tiny that bird is. Really, that's actually the smallest band that I can put on. But I don't know if you can see, you can actually see some of the numbers on it.
Just in the back.
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is where we're going to have you read just a little bit. So in September of 2019, there was it shook the world. It really did. Birders and everybody. If you were alive in the year 1970, yes, more than 1 in 3 birds in the US and Canada has disappeared in your lifetime. Right? There's my pause. Okay? But wait, there's more. What that basically means is almost 3 billion birds. That's a lot of birds, right? Here's the other piece to that. So some of you are familiar with the passenger pigeon, right? That was one species that was here in huge numbers and is not any longer. And we know why that is, right? I mean, there was a market for it, and that huge effort pressed it literally to oblivion. What's different now with 2.9 billion birds gone is it's not just one species, and I'll read this to you. It's a population, it's more than population loss among one species, and that means hundreds of species, so lots, coast to coast, so not just in one area. So that's why that's scary as all get out, is it's bigger and it's more, okay? So here is, I'm kind of a fan of not just words, right? Pictures are great. People learn that way, I think, pretty well. So here's an infographic that kind of shows what I just said. 2.9 billion birds gone, and it kind of gives some of the years for you there, because it was 2019 and kind of went into 2020. Here's one. I bet every one of you knows all those birds, right? Blue jays, 1 in 4 gone. The rose-breasted grosbeaks, who doesn't love a good grosbeak, right? 1 in 4 gone. Baltimore orioles, 1 in 3. White-throated sparrows, man, that's the one that I always think about and just, I mean, it's like brown popcorn on the ground, right? There's so many of them. 1 in 3. The dark-eyed juncos, the snowbirds. That's a lot of birds. They're all on one lake. Those are all the species. That's just a few of them out of the 70, but they're all there. I've seen multiple of all of them. So we got the white-throated sparrow, left, right, rose-breasted grosbeak, blue jay, junco, and the oriole. Rose-breasted grosbeak, I've actually had the same handsome gentleman a couple of different times, 2 to 3 years apart. So he's coming back. He's going to Costa Rica, and then he's coming back to New Brighton. Okay. Like his suitcase says, New Brighton or bust, right? Okay. All right, so here's another graphic, and again, I'm apologizing, Ben, I'm glad you said something. I'm trying to stay out of your way here a little bit, but so this graphic has birds, and they're kind of like the blackbird family. So I had someone I met right before here who kind of prompted me about blackbirds, red-winged blackbirds. Can you kind of see, so where the little black, so it's little circles kind of under the bird's picture, and it'll tell you kind of the percent of, we used to be here and now we're not anymore. So, I mean, common grackle, right? Really? Red-winged blackbird? Some of the finches aren't seen quite as much here. The Wilson's warbler, remember the one I've shown a couple different times? That one is, a lot of the population has gone. The Savannah sparrow, remember I said I was so excited about that Savannah sparrow? That was the LBB that was the far left on the very first slide. And they're all along lake. So the top is the Canada warbler, and the Savannah, and then the long one, that's the grackle. And then we have song sparrow, which is actually, that's my #1 bird, song sparrows. And it's one of my favorites. And then Wilson's again, and then a female redwing. So do you see how we're kind of starting to get it? It was indirect, but we're kind of getting to some of that. So who doesn't love family pictures, right? Right? Because that like tugs at the heartstrings. Right? Okay, so the one on the left is a female red-winged blackbird bringing like goopy green crawly thing to her little ones. And then the one on the right, I was so excited, that is Dad Grosbeak feeding the baby. At that really awesome oak tree that's like right at the corner, my favorite oak tree. I love that. I wish everybody would sit in that oak tree to see those pictures. So I'm going to read this to you guys because I think this is really a big deal. These bird losses are a strong signal that our human-altered landscape is losing its ability to support life. This is an indicator of a coming collapse of the overall environment. Usually doom and gloom is not the way to do a presentation, but this is kind of important. I mean, this is really kind of what we're getting to. That what's happening out there is happening to birds. What happens after things happen to things in the environment around us? Happens to us, doesn't it? Yep. First you'll see it, and then you'll see it with us. Okay. So now we're going to go to a little bit happier stuff, right? So now we figured the stuff out. So now what can we do with it, right? So that bird is called a red-eyed vireo. That's a really foxy bird. Boy, does that look... I mean, if you were a bug and that was the last thing you saw, wouldn't that be just like... That's terror, isn't it? That is so great. Okay. So what does this mean? Well, the idea that Ramsey County would say, we really want to learn about this, and we want to try to do what we can to make this literally a better place for birds, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, when you are a land manager with that much land, you actually can make a pretty big difference for some of those birds. And, you know, it should not surprise any of you that one of the reasons why we see so many of these drops is because of habitat loss, right? Or habitat that just can't support what it did at one time. So having these urban green spaces be healthy and ready to be a restaurant or a hotel or a gas station or housing for summer if you're gonna raise a family, that's a pretty big deal. That is a really big deal, and that's what we were kind of hoping to find. Okay. So now, we kind of got you, so remember that path that I said that wasn't exactly straight? It's still, we're getting a little closer now. So again, sorry, there's a little bit of text on this. So now that we figured out what we have, now how do we apply it, right? So here's the part where, the background that I have, what can I do to actually give something to Ramsey County to go out and either ask for grant to support any of the other work, or just be able to show what's there. So first we started big, so we started thinking globally, right? So there's a couple of different databases or pieces of literature. One is the State of North America's Birds Report, and it comes out every 5 to 7 years. And what it does is basically takes a little over 1,100 species of birds, and then they look at a couple of different things that say, all right, we're going to give you basically a number, 1 to 5. And it's going to kind of give you an idea of if it's vulnerable to habitat changing, to a number of different things. If you get a score of 4, that's like, that's kind of scary. If it's 5, it's, oh my goodness. Okay? So of the 70 species, remember 70 that we banded at Long Lake? Half of them have a 4 or 5.
Okay, what?
Have a score of a 4 or a 5. So using that, so this is an established way to kind of score the birds. What it shows is that the ones that are there are kind of already in big trouble. So now we're going to go locally, right? So that was a global, so now we look local. So the Minnesota DNR has something that's called the Minnesota's Wildlife Action Plan. And then as a part of that, they have a subset that's called Minnesota Species in Greatest Conservation Need. And that's plants and fish and mammals and birds. So it's a little bit of everything. They've looked at, in Minnesota, were you here? And then if you're not here, how bad is it? Or are you starting to not be here? And 7 of them are at it's what's called statistically valid decline. So that's that's something that we can give to the DNR. So that's something that can show something right here in Minnesota.
Is that bird in decline?
Oh, good. Oh my gosh. Okay, sidebar. This is one of those days I was all by myself. It was raining in the morning. I almost didn't go. And I was like, I got to do this. I just had to do this. Went out. I had mud all over my hands because, of course, I waited till it got done raining, but it's muddy and I'm setting up stuff. And I got that bird. And when I grew up in South Dakota, that was one of my neighbors I could have borrowed a cup of sugar from. That's called a grasshopper sparrow. And that bird actually has its own state plan written by Minnesota Audubon. And of course, nobody was there when I got it. Oh my God, I got him in the net and I was like, that can't be. And I pulled it out and I was like, it is. And I sent pictures to like 4 of my friends and they're all at work and nobody said anything. And there's one, I call him my kid. He just turned 22. He's going to save the world. I trained him. He's now at the University of California, and he is literally going to save the world. Frank was the first one to be like, "Oh my God!" And I was like, "Oh, see, it takes the next generation, right, to like understand what a big darn deal that was." But that was a big deal. Good, Ron. Thank you. Okay. So now let's look at some of these other notable birds. So that, and it may be a little hard to see, and Ben, I'm sorry, I'm kind of right in your way. So this is called a black-polled warbler, and this bird has, you can see, the 12,000 miles round trip when it migrates. So you can see the wintering grounds are way into South America, and it'll breed, it's north of Minnesota, it won't be here. but it'll go through Minnesota. And I got a male and a female. The top left is the male, and the bottom right is the female. And although it's still numerous, it's lost 88% of its population. Yeah, I mean, again, like that was crazy great to see it, but then to know where in its life we saw it, do you know what I mean? Like that is amazing that that bird came from South America and was on its way way far north of Minnesota, of New Brighton. But that was pretty important because conservation right now is actually really looking at, instead of just looking at wintering grounds and breeding grounds, if you can't get to either one of them, then putting money into saving either of them doesn't really do that much good, right? So the idea of how do we know how they get there is kind of what this would be. I mean, we know that black-billed warblers will come through New Brighton. And that's kind of a big deal. That's actually a really kind of an important piece to thinking about that. This is one of my favorite. So I sent this picture to Mike because I was literally, my eyes were shining, I couldn't believe it, and Mike was like, great, Amber, that's terrific. It is really not the foxiest bird you're ever gonna see, right? I get that. It's called a Connecticut warbler, but if you Google it, and you look at information on that, this is what it will say. Infamously hard to find bird. Owing to its remote habitats, Connecticut is among the least studied of American songbirds. People don't run into this. This bird, I actually calling it my birthday bird. It was the day after my birthday, last fall, but I'm calling it my birthday bird. There had been only 6 other ones reported at that time in all of the Twin Cities, in any of the parks. And birders are looking for this bird, let me tell you. This is like a holy grail bird, kind of. Connecticut is a big deal. Yep, it really, really is. So again, if you kind of see the wintering grounds is the blue, and then it'll actually, some of the birds actually will breed not that far north in South America, but otherwise you'll see it'll travel through and it just nicks us a little bit. Like it's really not even coming in Minnesota like in huge big numbers. Is it okay if I come over and point?
Yeah, yeah.
Like right there, right there, just a tiny little bit. And it will breed in like the Zaxton Bog area, up in near Duluth, but you can't find it because it's tough to find and stuff you can't walk in. It's really crazy. So I'll never forget this either. I had a couple of nets, and then I had a decent number of volunteers that day, and my Frank was like, let's put up another one. I'm like, all right, but you're gonna watch it. And he's like, okay. So went out and came back, and his eyes are like this. And this kid he was the young birder from Minnesota a couple of years ago. Like he's literally, like his spring break, he'll go to North Dakota for one sparrow. He really will. Like, that's nuts. And another volunteer, and we're all wearing boots, and like her boots didn't even touch the ground. And I'm like, what do you guys have? And we put them in bags till we get to band them. And Frank was like, you have not done this one yet, and I know that, because hardly anybody has. And so I said, all right, I need to figure out what band size to put on the bird. I said, you just tell me that, and I'm gonna not pass out. I'm gonna do this, right? I'm just gonna do this. And we figured out what band size it is, and we took it out of the bag, and I'm like, if I fall down and pass out, like, I'm the only one who can do this. So all right. I was like, okay, it's Connecticut. Frank's like, yep. So I put the band on the bird, did all the stuff I needed to do. She was hatched that year. It was a female. And then I was like, I'm gonna take a couple pictures, and I gave it to Frank, and I just went over in the corner and was like, my stomach does not feel good right now. But it was really exciting. So that was a really, really cool deal to be able to do this. And I still tell this story to people that are like, really, you found in Connecticut? Where was it? Like, what kind of habitat was it in? So that was a really big deal to be able to find one, and then you work backwards and you say, well, where was it? Like, what kind of habitat did this bird decide it wanted to be in? This is one of my favorites too. So this sparrow is so big, it actually wears a band size like a catbird. The little gray ones that are in your lilac bushes. It's called a Harris's sparrow. So so the bird's got a big dark face. That's a spring bird, so that's a breeding male. And the one on the far left is a hatchier bird. So as a young bird, they're as big as they're gonna get, but their plumage looks different. So that's a bird that I got last fall. So I've got Harris's sparrow coming and going. So I get him in the spring and I get him in the fall. So New Brighton is like on the line. And I'm gonna read a stat for you, and it's gonna sound like I pulled a fast one on you, but I didn't. So in the last day of the Birds Report, Harris's sparrows lost 50% of their populations in the last 50 years. It's called a tipping point species, so that was one that got like the 5. You know, when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, this was a 5. It's on a trajectory to lose another 50%. So what is 50 plus 50? It means no Harris's sparrows. I mean, that's what that is, literally. If things don't change, there will be no Harris's sparrows. And I can't live in a world without Harris's sparrows, I'm just gonna tell you guys right now. This is a great bird, this is one of my really favorite birds. So this was really important to find the 2 of them coming and going, I think. So I put the slide together just for you guys this morning. So I've been out only a handful of times so far this season. It's, you know, I do work and I have a great job that does let me have vacation, or I can go out in the morning and then work from home the rest of it. But it was 90 and that's not fun. And then it was raining and snowing and that's not fun either. So I haven't been out as long as I'd like. But in addition to the new birds that we banded, the 1,800, and the 70 species, I get birds that are coming back. So these are 2 different song sparrows. The one on the left, that old guy, I banded him April 28th of 2019. And I saw him on Sunday. Yep, and I haven't seen him since. That's what's interesting, so I can go back and see if I've seen him, you know, recovered over the 5 years. I have not seen him since. So he's been coming and going, but he's just not been I haven't been there at the same time. And then the second one, I banded him 8:30 to 20. So actually, because we're talking about April and August, I don't know if they actually breed there. April, you could still be going a little further north, so I don't know if you really are, this is the last of your destination. And August, you could be going south already. This isn't a long-distance migrant. This one will maybe go to Texas, some of the southern states, doesn't have to go very far. So I actually still don't know if this is one of my breeders or if this is a bird just kind of coming and going. And the fact that I hadn't run into that guy before Sunday makes me kind of wonder if he is just coming and going. And that's why I haven't run into him again. But that's really neat. When you get the bird that has the band already, and it's got kind of a patina on it, it's kind of older looking, you're like, that's so cool. Okay. So bluebirds, we mentioned bluebirds at the beginning of the conversation. Yeah, so again, for some of you who spend some time at the park, there is an absolutely wonderful lady named Lois Anderson, and she was the bluebird lady for Long Lake for 27 years. And she got out of the business a couple of years ago, and Mike said something to me, and I said, oh, God, I do have a job, I do have all this other stuff, so I better wait to say yes until I kind of know that I can really do this. And I waited about 4 years, and then I said, yeah, all right, I'll take over. So those boxes, there were 33 of them, by the way. A lot of boxes. That's a lot of boxes. And at the end of last year, I said, Mike, we don't need 33 boxes. So he had Conservation Corps volunteers, earnest young people make us 12 new ones. Do you guys know what the wooden bluebird boxes, the Peterson boxes, do you know what they look like? Okay. So if you are 18 years old, if one nail or screw is good, 6 is better. So the boxes that they made, God bless them, we had to kind of redo a lot of them because you have to open them, right? You have to go in there and look, and there was nobody getting into a couple of them. So we had to redo that a little bit. But what we did is actually took out old ones that, had been there a while, chewed up, top gone, facing into the raspberries, all that good stuff. And then some of them, literally, Mike was like, what do you want to do? I'm like, are you really? And was like, whatever you want to do. So I will say, one of the most arrogant things you can do in the whole world is to think you know about birds, because birds will tell you that you don't know about birds. And I find there's some comfort in that. I actually do, because there's always an opportunity to learn, right? So I told him, all right, there's a couple of them that we're going to replace right where they are, but there's a couple of them that I want to change where we put them. So we'll see how that goes. I've already got 2 of them that are in new spots. I already have 3 nests right now. There are 3 nests, we had 5 last year. So I have 3 nests, and 2 of them are in new spots. So that's kind of exciting. So the bird on the left is a 10-day-old baby bluebird. So you ban bluebirds in the box between 9 and 11 days old. And there's a reason for that. So as baby is growing, fat is actually feeding the baby along the leg. And fat will disappear from the leg at 9 days old. I can't ban sooner than that because the band wouldn't actually fit on the leg. The band would be too tight. And any later than that, and baby's like, I can go, but is not really ready to fly yet. So you have to get them right when you can get them out, band them safely, and then they'll still stay in their box until they're ready to fledge. So I literally have to time it within those 3 days, and I can't do it sooner, and I can't do it afterwards. So you'll see in the middle is Mom on the box, and I just peeked and then shut the door right away. The middle one is literally, that was like an hour-old baby. Like literally it just cracked the egg and there are 3 left to go. There's Mom and Dad down below. And then the one I'm holding, which is from the first slide, that is Dad, and I banded his baby in June as a 10-day-old, and then I caught the baby when he was in another part of the park in August, and then I got Dad, because baby was in the net, baby was screaming, Dad was like, what is going on? And so he went in the net too, so I banded Dad too. So I got Dad, and then I retrapped baby. So this is from April 9th. So one of the things that here's what I think. Bluebirds, so there's the Peterson boxes, that's what they look like. I really kind of put forth, I think bluebirds care more about places to perch on, to hunt, than the boxes themselves, where the boxes are. So this is where the bluebirds really will sit on all those signs that are along the driveway. And they really do. And then the bottom one is that little stick that comes off of the fire hydrants, in the winter time, so you don't knock them over. And that's one of the brand new boxes, and that was Dad checking it out before the missus came around. And then they jump on the ground and they get their bugs, and then they go sit up on the sign again. Yeah. Okay. So now what? So now this information that we have, it's basically one of the first things Mike did, which I was so happy about, is he used to mow that hill in June. And I was like, oh, please wait till August. And he goes, oh yeah, because you have ground nesting birds. So if you do that, then they're not going to survive. And I was like, yep. He goes, okay, Mike will never mow in June ever again. None of the parks. None of the parks in Ramsey County. And if you look at grassland species, that is actually one of the #1 things that is their decline is mowing in June. So he waits until all the birds are up and mobile before he'll do it. And when we do burns, so burns are important, and that is a part of the life cycle in a prairie. He doesn't do all of them. He'll do one at a time. So the first parking lot, he'll do the hill, and I see banded birds over like a half mile away in that next one. And then he will rotate that. So if they're here already, then they'll just move to the next one. And same thing, if he burns the next year over there, they'll move over here. So he doesn't do them all at once. And as a land manager, to make those changes, that's huge. I mean, that literally is birds found, like, I'm so exhausted. Wow, here's a place, and you can stay there. Even while this work is happening, right? And, he's got there's a lot of parkland in Ramsey County. Ramsey County actually has more park acres than any of the other 7. So the work that we're learning about here can be used as a template for some of the other parks. which is kind of cool. I'd love to, Mike actually said to me, he goes, I'd love for you to get into the other ones, and I'm like, I have to work, I actually have a job. I would love to, but I have this job that I have to go do. All right, so then the last part before we do some questions is how do I ban birds? So boy, is it okay if I run and point and then come back and they get out of the way? Okay. So I am using a couple of different birds to show you here. So this is my Wilson's Warbler. Remember, cute Wilson's Warbler. One of the ways we can tell if it's a male or female is to measure the crown. So that's what I'm doing here. And everything is in millimeters. I love the metric system. And if you ban birds, you get to use the metric system all the time. So here I'm measuring the crown, and it's a boy. Here I'm doing what's called a wing chord measurement. So the bird sits like this, and that's actually not the shoulder, that's the wrist. So I'm measuring from the wrist to the longest feather. I hold the bird, this is a cedar waxwing, and you've got to look in the book and figure out some information. And that's actually putting the band on the bird right here. That's actually one of the tools I use. So birds' legs are different sizes, so I have different holes. The band comes as a little metal circle. It's aluminum alloy, and it comes on a string. I have to open it up, and then I close it again on the leg.
How do you catch the bird?
In a net with mist nets. And then, let's see. Another one for you? Hang on a second here. Oh, it's just that one. Okay. So, thank you very much. I'm going to close with another thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being interested. This really couldn't be done without the work of my volunteers, with the county, with your interest. I think this is a really neat way to make a difference. You know, COVID, if nothing else, wow, did that teach us how powerless we are, right? When big things happen around us. And I think we're all still kind of searching a little bit to find ways that we can make a difference and make a positive impact with some of the things that are going on in the world. So this is one of them. And if you're interested in helping out, eBird is another, remember we talked about that database when you go out for your walks? Think about that. If you see and hear birds, put those in there. Even if it's the robin and the cardinal, that's good information, because at some point the robin and the cardinal may be the ones that we're looking at. And you don't know that until you start to see where it's just not there anymore. So it's kind of a big deal. So anyway, and that is a yellow-rumped warbler that I got. All right. Want to do some questions? Happy to do some questions? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot. Thank you. You mentioned a lot about the birds that are 4s and 5s.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any species that are increasing?
Wow, that is a super good question. Not any of the ones that I particularly looked at. One that I can tell you that has a fairly well documented are Cooper's hawks. And they nest kind of in and around here. It's a raptor. Cooper's hawks have really adapted well to urban landscapes. They can, and in fact, some of them even stay here over the winter. They eat other birds, so starlings, house sparrows, you know, some of the birds we kind of consider common. Cooper's hawks have actually really, their numbers have really come along. And another bird that I spent some time with, the American kestrel, that's a really sharp-looking falcon. One of the possibilities of the decline of that bird actually could be Cooper's hawks, because if you're smaller and you fit in a foot, you're a possible prey choice, even if you are a raptor as well. That is a fantastic question, thank you. Yeah? He's gonna double dip, that's all right. That's great.
Yeah, out of those 4s and 5s, is there a predominance of what they eat? In other words, are they more insect-oriented or grain-oriented?
Yeah, it really is the birds that have a really specific habitat type. So it's the grassland birds, the ones that are really closely tied to what would be open grassland prairie. We only have about 1% to 2% of that habitat type still existing in all of North America from when it originally was here. And And the other ones are birds like the Wilson's warblers and the Connecticut warblers, which are, you know, kind of that old growth or a really specific type of a woody area. So it's birds that are in specific habitat types that we just can't make more of. If it's gone, it's hard to really come back with it. So that's why it's kind of interesting, because when you are thinking about bird conservation and you think about what people wrote about birds 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, it's interesting because if you're going to survive, you almost have to lower your standards a little bit, right? So birds don't have that anymore, so what are they going to do? If they're going to survive, they have to come up with something, right? So that's what I think we might be learning is, even if you can't recreate true grasslands, if you could come up with a couple of acres of decent grassland that has flowers, fruits, oaks, things that offer something in as much of an annual cycle as you can in Minnesota that attracts insects, and you have seeds and fruits throughout the year, that may be what they're going to need, because they can't have what they had. You can't make that again, but maybe we can come up with something different. And you may not, there's a carrying capacity. You won't have the same number, but maybe they won't disappear completely. That's a great question. Great couple of questions.
Amanda, you talked about your experience here at Long Lake Regional Park. Are there other people similar status in other parks around the metro area here in Boone?
Sure, yeah, actually, I'm not the only bird bander in the state. Other people are doing different types of work. Grad students in particular, University of Duluth has a really great environmental sciences project. The Natural Resources Institute, also in Duluth, they've got people that are doing different projects. The cool part about what I do is, you know, a lot of projects, like 3 years is kind of a typical grad student project, right? And, you know, you kind of do it, and then you always end up with more study needed, right? And 5 years is kind of nice, because now you actually feel like you can say something. Because 3 years, I feel like 3 years, I was just learning. And in 5 years, and now going to 6 years, now I feel like I'm starting to have a better an idea of what's going on. Yeah, I'm by far not the only one doing it, but it is really kind of nice to use the background that I have to work with a county, because that is such a land management, it's just someone that has impact, you know, for birds in a larger scale. So thanks for asking, that's great. Yeah?
I was over looking at the loons on Long Lake the other day, and I was surprised that there's like more than a dozen. So I have questions about the population that you notice of loons on Long Lake, and when do they leave? Do they ever leave in a certain month? And then follow-up question is, what about the turkeys around Long Lake?
Lots of turkeys. So the common loons that you're seeing in the spring, all of them are not going to stay here. Long Lake would probably not be able to support multiple pairs. Last year there was a pair that was kind of around a lot, but I never could find exactly where they were. Right now in the spring, you get, again, if you've got ice out, and we do, into Duluth and up there, it's not. So you've got birds that can land here, stay here for a little while, but this is not their ultimate destination. So you won't see this many loons into May that much. So you get this wonderful opportunity to hear and see quite a few of them, but not for long. It'll be moving on up. The DNR actually has a pretty great website. The state bird has a lot of folks looking at research on the bird. There was a really kind of a cool project. I don't know that they're still doing it, but you can follow it on their website, or you could. Did you know that all loons that are going to be hatched this year are going to leave Minnesota and they're not going to come back for 2 years? The same as the osprey. You know the osprey, the fishhawk? They don't come back for 2 years because they wouldn't breed. So where you are along the Gulf Coast, for example, that's pretty great. Like, stay there for a little while until you have to come back here and find your significant other and do all that flying and migrating. And the thing that was kind of interesting that they found is, so they're divers. You probably know that. And they actually, instead of banding like I do, so it's a way to mark an individual on the outside, they actually embedded a piece of technology that could actually tell where the bird is diving and how deep it's diving. So what they learned is that a young loon will fish closer to the coastline and not go as deeply. And if you have done it a while, you will be braver and you will be able to leave and you go further out from the coast and you will dive deeper. And so stuff like that is really, really interesting, again, as you're kind of looking at the overall population, because not one size fits all for all the loons. It depends on if you're a young loon or an adult loon. And they'll probably have some pretty good stats on numbers. I don't know. I know that a lot of citizen science people will say the loons are back on my lake and they'll report that. And that's good to know. Yeah.
Turkeys.
Oh, the turkeys. Yeah, that's another urban bird, so that's a great one. Yeah, turkeys have come along, haven't they? Yeah, that's, I lead a couple of young birding groups, and when I first started, it was like, name a bird you see, and it was, blue jay and cardinal, and then for a while it was like turkeys, 'cause that's all that's what was in their yard, right, in their schoolyard. Yeah, wild turkeys have really adapted well to urban settings. So we have them, absolutely.
Saw 18 babies by the caboose.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I had to get them out of my nets a couple of times. They were getting pretty close. So, turkeys. I was a turkey herder. Yeah?
So, Applewood is going to be doing a long-range landscape
Who is
thing.
this? I-
Applewood.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry.
So, if you want to leave us any suggestions, I don't know about prairie grasses, but anything that we could incorporate, because we want to have a pretty landscape, but we would also like to have a good habitat for our fellow creatures.
Absolutely. I actually teach a couple of birdscaping for beginners classes, so I'd be happy to help you with some ideas. Sure.
And then one question. I always thought that birds went into shock very easily, and why don't you have to worry about this when you're grabbing them with nets and stuff?
Oh, I worry about it all the time.
Okay.
Absolutely. Again, these are lives, so at every step with the weather changing, and if it gets windy, and if it gets hot, and if it gets wet, and I don't want them hanging for too long, absolutely I think about that. When I handle them, so I have gone through, I don't want to think about how many hours of training before I actually got a permit to do this, and that's why the volunteers that I have also go through a lot of training. We hold the birds in such a way that they're not going to waste a lot of energy fighting and trying to get away. When I hold them, when they're getting ready for banding, we minimize the exterior stimuli so it's not freaking them out as much as I can. Any bird that does look stressed, and again, you have to learn to know what that looks like, they don't get a band. We just release them. Absolutely. It is absolutely more important. It's kind of like the caduceus, right? I mean, above all, do no harm. I mean, you're not supposed to be doing this work if what you're doing is sacrificing the things you want to learn from. I want to see them again. I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? So if I don't get to see them again, then I don't want to do this.
I have a question about the bluebirds.
Yeah.
Now, a year or two ago, I think maybe it was even 3, there was this story about how devastating the winter was on
Yes.
the bluebird population.
Yes.
And what is the status now, and did that have an impact on bluebirds in Long Lake Regional Park?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So bluebirds are what they call a short or medium range migrant. So yes, a lot of our Minnesota bluebirds were in Texas when the ice apocalypse of a couple of years ago happened. That's exactly right. So it actually was the year before last year that happened. And so when I took over last year, I literally had no idea if I was going to see any of them. Because I have friends that are bluebird monitors in Nebraska, which is a great landscape if you're a bluebird. And I have other friends that are bluebird monitors in different parks, different places here. And we did not see, the friend in Nebraska, I think I counted this right, he has like 170 boxes, and he only had like 20 of them occupied the year after that happened. I mean, that really, and actually it was interesting, this past Saturday, I was at the Science Museum, I was doing a program, and a woman from El Paso came, and we were talking about the ice apocalypse, and she said, you know, I've lived there 60 years. We've never seen anything like that. It literally got to 9 degrees, and it was like 10 days of it. It wasn't just a couple of days. I mean, it was people and birds and everything. They had never seen anything like that. This year, there was a day and a half. Like it started like Tuesday night, and it went through sort of Wednesday and into Thursday a little bit. You could probably work through that. But yes, it really impacted bluebird numbers, absolutely. I was surprised to get 5 pair, but it was also like, I cleaned all the boxes that hadn't been cleaned for a couple of years. And it really does, when birds first get here, you know, there's a lot of sumac berries, there's a lot of stuff for them to eat right when they first get here, so they might have just said, all right, we'll stop here. I don't know if we make it work, but we do. And I think it's still gonna take a couple of years for them to come back. That was a big deal. Yeah,
A follow-up question on the bluebirds.
yeah.
There's been, you know, I don't know when the Peterson houses became a thing, but, you know, encouraging the eastern bluebird in this area has been kind of huge for what, 25 years?
More than that, yeah.
Is there any evidence that that has done anything positive for the population up until the debacle in Texas?
Oh, gosh. Well,
Are they a 4 or a 5? Are they one of
They're
those
not.
fragile?
they're not, okay, that's a great question. Let me see if I can get to a couple pieces. First of all, no, they are not on that global scale recognized as of yet. However, there is another, so Audubon and Cornell are kind of the two for bird nerds. They're the ones that kind of tell us, here's how to do this, or here's a bit of information about them. Bluebirds have been recognized as a species of concern for them. So what they're looking at is that idea that if warming overall happens, you know, it's that 1.5 degrees Celsius and 3 degrees Celsius, bluebirds actually may be one of them that are affected because they are an insect eater. They also eat, you know, the fruits and things that we'll start to see those plants kind of in their typical range not be found there anymore, right? It'll be a little bit further north. And the further you have to go to find that, you may not be able to make it till you start to see the trees now that you used to nest in or the fruits that you needed to eat. So bluebirds are kind of one of them that we are looking at, so not as bad as the 4 or 5, but should pay attention. Do boxes help? That is a great question. Bluebirds will nest in a cavity of a tree if you don't have a box. So that idea that if you have a cavity and you safely can leave that tree up, there's a lot of birds that use that, whether it's woodpeckers and nuthatches and chickadees and bluebirds. That is, you know, what can I do? That, right there. That is a huge thing, is don't tear down your trees. Boxes, I think, are great ideas. They certainly make you feel better, right? And that's I shouldn't make it sound like I'm making that less. The boxes are great, it needs to make sense. The best example I can give you guys is wood ducks. Remember how it was like, save the wood ducks? And do you know where wood ducks live? I'm a wood duck, right? I got nails on my feet because I live in the woods. I'm in the tree. And people put wood duck boxes in big open areas like golf courses, right? Nobody really asked the wood ducks if that was really where you wanted it. So that was a great example. And Minnesota, I mean, we did it, Minnesota did it, you know, of not really asking the wood ducks. And the wood ducks are like, well, okay, great, but. So the idea that nest boxes, they're terrific, it's got to really kind of look like it's going to help the species, and placement matters. And that's why I showed you guys, I really think what else is around them is what matters more to bluebirds than the houses themselves, because I watch them all the time, and this is what they do. They perch on the signs and stuff. So when Mike and I tore down some of the old boxes, we left the posts. And they perch on the posts. They like that more than they like anything else. Because we were like trying to kick them over, and I was like, you know, why don't we just leave them? And I've seen them perched on them already this year. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of swallows?
Yeah, so the tree swallows came first, and I've seen a couple of barn swallows. Northern roughwing I have banded, which is a pretty big deal. And I think there's been one or two other ones that I've documented, but I haven't banded them. I had a tree swallow that I banded as a hatch your bird and came back the next year. And that was pretty cool. The band was so shiny, because they don't like go in the grass and make it not shiny. That was cool. And it's a bug eater, right? They're flying around in the sky all the time. It was like, that was awesome. You know? Like banding does not hurt the birds, right? Came back.
A question, do you do owls at all?
I do. I have friends that do Sawit, northern Sawit owls. We're on the permit together. There's a great horned, oh man. So there was a killing field of bunnies, like right when you came in the park. There was like 8 little cottontails right there. There was a great horn, that was the killing field over the winter. And that bird is one that the nets that I'm using will tear them up. So I'm actually like, come on, you gotta go now, go, go, go. And a couple years ago, there were 2 little ones that were in there all the time. So I don't know if you've ever seen them, been right in that oak tree right when you came in there. It was like that's Halloween where it's the silhouette sitting in the tree, and I'm like, you gotta go now.
One time, and this is probably 4 years ago,
Yeah,
right, you know, those 2 arms for the
Yes.
bell?
yes,
One out on one,
I know
this is in the morning, early in the morning when it's dark,
it. Yeah,
hooting, and on the other one, there's another one answering back. and
yes,
forth.
yes.
But that's been several years ago.
You gotta go now, because I don't want you in my net.
How do you explain the robins that have been wintering here instead of going south?
Isn't that something? So, and I saw robins fishing this past year. I got great pictures of brook stickleback, which I learned. Does anybody know what that is? They usually hang out with minnows, and they look like little dinosaurs because they have little like sails on their back. So one of the cool things about what I do is when you ban an individual, you have that data point, right? On this date, here is this, at this time. One of the things about robins and blue jays is the birds that you see here may not be the birds that hatched here. We may have the Duluth robins and the Duluth blue jays. Because Duluth is harder in the winter than it is here, although this last one, I mean, you can tell me that, but I don't know that I'm going to believe that. So the robins that are here they may have gone back north already. We will have robins, we may just not have the same number of robins. But again, we've changed the landscape. So buckthorn, for example, when everybody thought that was a great idea to use as a hedge plant, buckthorn was like, let's do this, and has not left, right? It's the guess that you can't make it leave. They will eat the berries, but you know, there's a lot of choke cherries and sumac berries, things that they can eat. So robins can make a living out of the area in the wintertime. Yep. They're not the harbinger of spring anymore. They're kind of here all the time.
We'll take 2 more questions, I
Okay.
think.
All right.
How large are the nets that you use?
I use a couple of different sizes. So I'm going to switch back and forth with metric and feet and inches. So the nets are 12 meters long, and they're about 5 meters high, and they're in pockets. And what I use, now I'm going to use what I go to get at Menards, so now we're going to do feet and inches, is a 1/2-inch electrical conduit that's 10 feet, and I have to cut it in 2 because my car is a Camry and I can't do 10 feet, so I do 2 5-foot lengths with a collar. So I have about 10 foot that I can stretch my nets out on. I have some shorter, so I kind of look and see what the landscape is. So 12 is kind of my go-to, but I have some 6 and 9s for little tighter corners. And then I have an 18, but I don't really use it here because I don't have anything that's long enough really to put it in. Yeah.
I think you just answered my question.
All right.
But I pictured you listening to their songs.
Yeah.
And then following until you found the bird.
I actually bird by ear more than by sight anymore. I really do. Part of it is it's sometimes you never see them, right? And so this way I know that it's there. Yeah, I have chosen some of my net lanes based on what I think might be there. I'm not above that.
Every once in a while, when Catherine and I would walk through the park, you'd have barriers up and roped off and please stay out signs. And
Yeah.
what's happening in those?
I've got my nets up, and I don't want anybody walking in there because you'll damage my equipment or you'll step on birds. So I'm keeping you out from there, so the birds stay safe and my equipment, I don't have to buy anything.
And one other quick question just popped in my head.
Yeah.
At an average hour, how many birds do you?
It depends on the time of year. So my best day was 2 really good days, and I was by myself, and I got 45 birds in like 2 hours. And that was a lot. They were the sparrows, so they're the ones I love, and I can process them pretty quickly because I know what I'm looking for and I know how to do it. And then today I was out for 2 hours and I got 8 birds. And I had a volunteer with me. Oh, one of them was a flicker, and that was awesome. And she screamed really loud. Yep, she's not happy.
Wow. Amber, this has been an outstanding program. Let's give it. I do want to thank a couple of people. I want to thank